Welcome to Monday Morning Moments. We are in a series entitled The Path to Peace, and it's based on a book project that I've been working on entitled The Path to Peace, 10 verses that can help you develop faith over fear. And we may include more than 10 verses. There's so many verses in the Bible that talk about fear and not fearing, and talk about finding peace in Jesus. And I think God knew that we would find trouble in this world. We talked about that in our last podcast episode, but that we can find peace in Him. And the verse we'll talk about today is John 10:10. It's related to a verse that I shared in the first podcast episode, 2 Timothy 1:7, that talked about how God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And I think a lot of times we face fear in our lives because there's an enemy who wants to come against us. And Jesus was talking about this in this verse. And he wanted to make sure that we understood that it may not be the person in the cubicle next to you or the person that you're in relationship with, that you're having a conflict with, that's the enemy. There's an enemy that's a spiritual enemy against us and is coming against us and doesn't want us to find faith over fear in our lives and to carry out our purpose in our lives as well. And in this verse, before Jesus gets to John 10:10, he's talking about being a good shepherd and that his sheep hear and know his voice. He also says that he lays down his life for his sheep. And so it's in this context where he's talking about how a good shepherd is opening the door for his sheep to get into the place where they're staying, and that he's going to protect them. And that he's a good shepherd that protects and wards off evil that tries to come and attack the sheep, but he also guides them to green pastures and guides them to still waters, as it says in Psalms 23. And so in that context where he's talking about being the good shepherd and how a good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep, he relates us to that. He was relating his disciples and other people that he was talking to back in the day about being sheep and following the good shepherd. But he also talks to us today. This is a message for us today. And that if we've come to know Jesus, that he's a good shepherd who will protect us and guide us. And in that context, we find John 10:10. He says that the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And I always talk about this verse when I'm talking about how there's an enemy that comes to steal our joy, to kill our purpose, and destroy our impact. And we need to understand that that's what the enemy's trying to do, to steal your joy, to kill your impact, and destroy your purpose. In the first episode, I talked about how even if you're not a person of faith, even if you're not a follower of Jesus, you understand in the battle of competition, the heat of competition, or just in the land of comparison that we live in, that we will face people who want to steal our joy. You may know people like that, and they come to mind as you're listening to this podcast. That person's a joy stealer, and I know exactly who they are. But we have to understand there's a spiritual battle going on where the enemy wants to steal our joy. Jesus refers to him as a thief. They also want to kill our purpose. You may feel like you don't have a purpose in life, and the enemy wants you to feel that and to kill your purpose. And again, in the heat of competition, you may check into a game, whether it be soccer or basketball or whatever it might be, and the opponent wants to kill your purpose. The purpose, the reason that you came in, they want to kill that and then destroy your impact or destroy any impact that you can have. And I want to dive into those a little bit more because Jesus made it a point to talk about this and to talk about those three things. So how can the enemy steal our joy in the first part of that? I think that the enemy wants to use or create moments that discourage and defeat you and keep you from having joy in the moment. He will use moments and create moments sometimes to discourage and defeat us and keep us from having joy in the moment. And you may understand that. You may be going about your day and you're excited about the day. Maybe you've said some self-affirmations. It's going to be a great day. I'm going to be a champion today. I'm going to win today. I'm going to make that sale. And then we have moments that discourage and defeat us. It might be, again, coffee spilling on our shirt, or maybe we don't make the sale, or we make a few phone calls and we're not able to make an impact in somebody's life because they don't want to hear from us. And you may be trying to see clients and they don't want to purchase whatever you're selling in that moment. Or maybe you've had some bad outings as a golfer and maybe you're thinking about that, and those moments have stolen your joy and kept you from having joy in the moment. And I think that's one of the ways that the enemy does that. He creates those moments or leverages those moments to say, hey, look at this, and to maximize our attention on that. And again, it relates to stealing our joy. Another point I think in that is that he wants to focus our attention on everything that is going wrong or could go wrong, distracting us from joy that we can have in our lives. So if you find your attention going to everything that's wrong or that it could go wrong or that you're worrying about things that have happened or could happen, and most of the time they're things that can't or not happening, but we just imagine them up in our minds, it distracts us from having joy in the moment and the joy that we can have in our lives. And so I think to combat that, we need to make sure that we seek joy out, that we keep a gratitude journal, that we think about the things that we're joyful about so that we don't allow the enemy to steal our joy. And again, I talk all the time with my athletes about playing with joy and focus, and that's so important. Most of the time they can focus on focus in their lives and play with focus, but I think we have to find joy in those moments and to enjoy the moments, enjoy the work, enjoy the things that we're doing, enjoy the people we're doing it with it, and make sure that we're grateful for those moments so that we can find joy in each and every moment. Again, I think the enemy tries to kill our purpose by lying to us and telling us that you don't have a purpose. And so you may be feeling that way today. You may feel like you don't have a purpose or the enemy is trying to kill your purpose. And that's a lie. He's lying to you and telling you that you don't have a purpose. Maybe that person next to you has a purpose, or maybe that person on a platform has a purpose, but you don't have a purpose. So don't even think about that. And that kills our purpose because we don't even walk out every day with a feeling of having a purpose, a thought around what that is, and we're not seeking that out. And so he tells us, you don't have a purpose. Or the enemy can point to our mistakes and say that given your past, you could never have a purpose or platform to make a difference. And he points to those mistakes and says that that will never allow you to have a purpose beyond that. You know, again, I think about my own life, and I've shared with this on other podcasts that, you know, my dad left when I was at an early age, and the enemy could have been saying to me and probably tried to say to me that given your past, you could never have a successful family or you could never father boys because you didn't have a father in your own life. But again, as I've said in podcasts, my heavenly Father stepped in and said, that's a lie, and that wasn't your mistake, but given it was a mistake in your family's history, it's not going to be a mistake that's repeated. And I'm going to show you a greater path, and I'm going to make you a father of men, and I'm going to allow you to do that. And he's blessed my wife and I with 5 boys and has allowed us to move past that, even though it wasn't a mistake that we made. But I think whatever it is, whether it's a mistake kind of around you or a mistake that you've made, we can't allow past moments and to affect how we move forward in future moments as well. And God wants to give you a purpose. He has created you for a purpose, and he wants to reveal that to you. So we want to make sure that the enemy doesn't lie to us and kill our purpose based on previous moments in our lives. We need to move past those. And then the third piece of this verse talks about destroying our impact. And when we talk about this, you know, that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, I think he wants to destroy your impact. And how does he do that? Well, he can leverage regret and shame over past moments. We were just talking about that. But if you're feeling regret and shame over past moments, and again, this could be maybe just something in a sporting contest where you've been playing in a sport, even in a certain game, you've missed a bunch of shots or things like that, and you have regret and shame over that. Sometimes that, again, causes you to spiral downwards in performance and not show up and have an impact in future moments because you're thinking about the past moments. So you're not fully there and you're not fully present and giving your best. And I see it with golfers all the time. I mentioned this again in the previous podcast that golfers tend to show this. They have a spiraling downwards in performance because of the regret and shame over past moments. And whether it be a life situation or a business situation or a sports situation, you can't allow the regret and shame over past moments, maybe where you failed or you haven't shown up, destroy your impact to have an impact in your life and an impact in the lives of other people. Maybe you've heard it said that sometimes the testimony of your life and the testimony of regret over past moments can be a testimony, an impact, and a transformational moment for other people as you share your story and share what you've gone through in past moments. I think another way that the enemy tries to destroy our impact is to create roadblocks that cause us to focus on the apparent lack of momentum in our lives toward a goal to try and keep us from continuing to move forward through these moments. And again, that's a mouthful, but I think leveraging moments to destroy our impact and keep us from having that momentum in our lives. I think when we don't see things happening in our lives and we see a lack of momentum in our lives, it causes us to stall out and trying to keep us from continuing to move forward through these moments. Basically, you're moving forward towards a goal, and the enemy says, well, look, you're not making any progress here, or what you're doing is not making a difference. And you tend to agree with that lie from the enemy, and then you don't continue moving forward because you're frustrated in that moment, and it destroys any future impact that you have because you give elevation to that lie in your life, and you say, well, yeah, there's no momentum here. And yet we don't see what God is working on behind the scenes and working in and through our lives in those moments. And I've had so many times where I have been doing things and haven't seen an immediate impact, gotten a little frustrated, but continued to pray through those moments to say, God, use this and leverage this, and I know you're working, and I'm just going to trust you in these moments. And then he has shown up, and people have showed up, and there's been a moment of impact based on years almost of working through certain things and working towards things and being faithful with those little moments that have big and transformational moments, again, sometimes years down the line. And it may not be years. It may be next week. It may be tomorrow as you're working on things in your life. But I would just continue to encourage you to think about that, and you are having an impact even when you don't see it, and that God wants to work that in and through your life. And so I think one other way that he tries to destroy our impact, and I'll share this as the last point on this and then make a summary point, is that he wants to work in and through other people to try and limit our effectiveness. So sometimes it's through other people, and again, them saying things in your life and saying lies about you, or just discouraging you. You know, wow, you've been working on that, you don't seem to have much progress there, or I didn't know that was a strength of yours, or whatever it might be, that those little comments can get in our head, and then it feeds it. And we may rise up in the moment against that, but then we agree again with that person who's sharing that, and the enemy can speak through them to try and limit our effectiveness. And we have to realize that there's a spiritual warfare going on all around us. This is what Jesus was talking about. In fact, Paul tells us in Ephesians 6:12, and I love this verse. It says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Paul wanted us to know that there is a spiritual warfare going on, and it's not what we see in front of us. Sometimes it's the unseen. In fact, a lot of times it's the unseen battle that's going on. And God is waging that war against our spiritual enemy and wants to make sure that he's protecting us just like that good shepherd. And again, Jesus talks about the thief coming to steal, kill, and destroy. But he said, I have come so that you may have abundant life. And he wants to give you a life where you are flourishing, where you can thrive, where you can persevere through any fear on this earth. And even if you're in a level of deep anxiety right now, that the enemy's trying to get you to convince you of those things, to steal your joy, to kill your purpose, and destroy your impact. But Jesus has come because he wants to give you an abundant life, and a life that is fulfilling and that fulfills the reason that God created you in the first place. So I just want to encourage you to walk out in that today. Know that there is an enemy that's trying to do all these things, but that you can have joy in this life, you can have a fulfilling purpose, and you can have transformational impact in and through your life. And that's available to everybody, not just people who have the big platforms. It's all of us in sports, business, and life. And as we always say, we want to go out and make the most of moments in our lives this week.